What makes this story so extraordinary is not merely the confrontation between Ottawa and Washington. It is what the confrontation reveals about the illusion of power itself. For generations, Americans grew up believing that geography had blessed their country with an unshakable strategic advantage. 2 oceans, friendly neighbors, the world's reserve currency, the strongest military in history, the largest consumer market on Earth. Those advantages were real. But they also created a dangerous assumption: that America would always have options. That if one route closed, another could be opened. If one partner resisted, another could replace them. If one ally refused, economic gravity would force compliance. This belief became so deeply embedded into the American political psyche that few ever questioned it. Until now. Because this crisis exposed something uncomfortable. The world's largest economy is not a machine that runs independently. It is an ecosystem. And ecosystems depend on relationships. They depend on trust. They depend on geography. They depend on infrastructure built over generations. Most importantly, they depend on assumptions that everyone involved will continue playing by the same rules. The moment those assumptions are challenged, the true architecture of power becomes visible, and what suddenly emerged from the shadows was astonishing. The United States, despite its enormous wealth and military strength, cannot simply replace the logistical advantages Canada provides. Not quickly, not cheaply, not without years of disruption. Think about what that means. For decades, Canadian ports were treated as supporting actors in the North American story. Background infrastructure, useful, reliable, predictable. Few Americans knew their names. Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Montreal, Halifax. They weren't symbols of geopolitical influence. They were simply there, quietly doing their jobs, until someone reminded the world just how important they really are. History teaches us that great powers rarely collapse because they lack strength. They stumble because they misunderstand the limits of that strength. The British Empire believed global naval supremacy guaranteed eternal influence. Then, 2 world wars shattered its finances. The Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons capable of destroying civilization. Yet empty supermarket shelves and economic stagnation hollowed out its foundations. Even ancient Rome did not fall in a single dramatic moment. It exhausted itself maintaining systems it assumed would never fail. Every empire eventually discovers the same truth. Power is not ownership. Power is access, and access depends on consent. That is why Carney's response struck such a nerve. Because he wasn't arguing about tariffs. He wasn't debating percentages. He wasn't negotiating terms. He was challenging an entire philosophy. He was effectively saying, you believe size gives you entitlement, but dependence changes the equation. Those words carry implications far beyond Canada and the United States. Because every nation watching understood the message immediately. Japan understood it. Germany understood it. India understood it. Even America's competitors understood it. The strongest country in the world had just publicly identified one of its own vulnerabilities. That knowledge cannot be erased. Investors remember. Governments remember. Supply chain planners remember. Once risk becomes visible, behavior changes, and behavior changes history. Perhaps the most dramatic aspect of this entire episode is how quickly leverage can reverse. For years, analysts described Canada as economically dependent on the United States, its largest trading partner, its largest customer, its dominant influence. That analysis wasn't wrong, but it was incomplete. Dependence in one direction often creates dependence in another. Canada sells into the American market. America moves through Canadian infrastructure. Canada relies on American consumers. America relies on Canadian geography. Each side holds pieces of leverage the other cannot easily replace. The difference is that one side publicly reminded the world of that reality. The irony is almost Shakespearean. An attempt to project strength became evidence of weakness. A demand intended to force submission inspired resistance. An effort to secure greater control accelerated diversification. The louder the pressure became, the more aggressively others searched for alternatives. And alternatives, once created, rarely disappear. That may ultimately be the true cost, because trade relationships are built on confidence. Confidence takes decades to establish. Every logistics executive now asks questions they weren't asking before. Should our supply chains become less dependent on any single country? Should we diversify port access? Should we establish new corridors? Should we rethink assumptions that have guided decisions for decades? Those conversations are happening in boardrooms right now, quietly, without cameras, without speeches. Yet their consequences may outlast any headline. This is how the world changes. Not always through wars, not always through elections, sometimes through shifts in perception, sometimes through a sentence spoken at a podium. A phrase repeated enough times that it alters how leaders calculate risk. The most powerful weapons of the 21st century are often invisible. Ports, railways, semiconductors, energy pipelines, critical minerals, data networks. The countries that understand these realities earliest gain advantages, others only recognize after it is too late. The uncomfortable truth for every nation is that strategic vulnerability is not a sign of failure. It is unavoidable. No country is truly self-sufficient. No economy stands alone. Globalization created unprecedented prosperity precisely because nations specialized and depended upon one another. The danger emerges when leaders forget that dependence requires respect, because respect preserves cooperation. Arrogance destroys it. And once trust begins to fracture, even allies start preparing for futures they once considered impossible. Perhaps decades from now, historians will look back on this moment not as a dispute over ports, not as another chapter in a trade disagreement, but as the day North America was forced to confront a reality it had ignored for generations. That power in the modern world is not measured solely by GDP, military spending, or population. It is measured by resilience, by adaptability, by the ability to maintain access without coercion, by understanding that influence obtained through partnership lasts longer than influence demanded through pressure. Because ultimately, the nations that endure are not the ones that shout the loudest. They are the ones that understand the systems they depend upon. They protect those systems. They respect the people who help sustain them, and they never mistake necessity for ownership. The great irony of history is that empires often announce their vulnerabilities themselves, not through defeat on the battlefield, but through moments of overconfidence. Moments when they reveal what they desperately need while trying to prove they do not need anyone at all. And when that revelation happens, the world listens. Because once dependency becomes visible, leverage changes forever. And once leverage changes, history rarely turns back.